Listen-only mode.
Welcome to the March Community IT Innovators webinar series. Thank you for joining us today for what promises to be an informative look at data quality. Hi, my name is Johan Hammerstrom, and I'm the president of Community IT. For those of you who are not familiar with Community IT, our skilled and certified team of IT professionals serves the greater Washington nonprofit community, helping organizations of all sizes and capacities to advance their missions through the effective use of technology. Community IT is deeply invested in the nonprofit community. We've served over 900 nonprofits since 1993, and we take a strategic and collaborative approach that fits the unique needs and culture of all nonprofit organizations. We're happy to be co-presenting today's webinar with Build Consulting. A few tips before we get the webinar started. We encourage you to interact with us by asking questions via the GoToWebinar chat feature. And you can also connect with us on Twitter. We can be followed at Community IT, and we'll be tweeting throughout the webinar today. Just a reminder to avoid multitasking during the webinar, because you might just miss the best part. If you do happen to miss the best part, though, or need to leave the webinar early, we will be posting links and recording and slides on our website after the webinar is over. And now I'm going to turn the presentation over to Peter Miras and allow him to introduce himself and also his co-presenter, Kyle Haynes, who will tell you a little bit more about Build Consulting. Peter, good afternoon.
Thanks, Johan. Hi, everybody. My name is Peter Miras. I'm a nonprofit business and information strategy consultant working with community IT innovators. Over the past 20 years, I've worked with a wide variety of nonprofit orgs, ranging from small startups to large international organizations. And what I've learned from working with these organizations is that data quality is a challenge for everybody, whether they realize it or not, or whether or not they use the term data quality when discussing the related issues. And during different parts of my career, I spent a considerable amount of time advising clients on strategic branding, marketing, and development initiatives. And I've also spent a lot of time on program design and program management, business process development. The organizations that tend to excel most in both of those areas take care with their data. They seek to collect data beyond what is naturally created as a byproduct of their work. And they understand how to leverage that data to drive impact and create clear and compelling stories. So from my broad experience as an information strategy generalist, I can tell you that the potential for many organizations to create new standards of excellence, in part through a renewed emphasis on data quality as a broad concept, is huge. It is realizations such as this that inspire my work and all of the work at Community IT Innovators, Build Consulting, and the firms with which we partner. And now I'd like to ask Kyle Haynes from Build Consulting to introduce himself and his experience.
Hey, Peter, thanks for the intro. It's really good to be on the webinar today, and you said it really well. I mean, this has become a huge topic, so really excited to lend my experience to this, and I know I'm going to learn a lot along the way as well. So Build Consulting, we are focused primarily on CRM consulting for nonprofits. I personally have about 25 years of experience working with and for nonprofits. And, you know, for me, data quality, my experience with nonprofits is interesting. And as I said, 25 years of experience, for me, that means right out of college, I went to a nonprofit, and one of the first things I was asked to do was to restart a CRM implementation that at that point I think could be categorized as dead in the water. And I think it actually says a lot about the organization at that point that they entrusted that to me. It says something about where they were with respect to their maturity around data quality and thinking about data quality. They really viewed the system at that point kind of like a Rolodex, or viewing it as a donation management system, you know, putting gifts in or getting acknowledgement letters out and perhaps creating an annual report at the end of the year. Obviously, this is an expensive proposition with respect to thinking about CRM in that limited way. And I think for me, sometimes it's hard in my work to see the huge drain that these systems put on organizations when they haven't really adequately defined what data quality means to them. So excited to be here. Really, I'm hoping that I can share along the way some relevant examples. But Peter, again, thanks for inviting me to co-present with you.
My pleasure. Thanks, Kyle. So let's just have a quick look at the agenda. First, we're going to talk about what we are and are not going to cover today and ask the question, why data quality? And then we're going to quickly talk through the 5 dimensions of data quality with some examples. I'm just going to say a few words about an approach to creating solutions for data quality, and then in addition to taking some of your questions throughout the course of the webinar today through the chat, we'll also leave some time at the end for questions, and I think we'll probably stay a little bit long if anybody has questions that take us beyond the hour time slot. So what are we going to talk about today? So through multiple information system design, implementation, integration, and migration projects, we have seen nonprofits encounter and then either deal or fail to deal with data quality issues. And the kinds of decisions they make regarding data quality are interesting to us in 3 ways. First, data quality decisions have the ability to determine how successful an organization will be, how it sets itself up for success, mediocrity, or failure based on its ability to manage and leverage its data to make informed decisions and drive impact. Second, data quality decisions are profoundly revealing of the strengths and limitations of an organization. Does it have the strategic vision to make appropriate investments in data quality? Does it know what relationships the organization has and what data is important to nurturing and growing those relationships? Does it have the leadership and the discipline to require staff to adhere to corporate policies, standards, and business processes that result in good data quality? And third, many organizations don't fully understand what the full picture of data is. Data is all of the information that your organization collects, both qualitative and quantitative, both structured and unstructured, or in another way of putting it, both the narrative and the numbers. So today's webinar is designed to be educational in nature and to answer the question, what is data quality? And we'll do this, as I said, by naming and defining some of the critical dimensions of data quality and relating them to real-life scenarios. We hope that you'll find something either in the definitions of data quality or in the scenarios that resonate with you and your work, that captures your intellect, your imagination, and perhaps your emotions. You've probably heard the saying garbage in, garbage out, meaning that if you have poor data quality in your systems, you get poor quality reports from those systems. So the graphic that you're seeing on the screen here, and many like it, helps to illustrate the critical nature of data quality, and I chose it because of its direct and ironic relevancy to the garbage in, garbage out saying. The graphic, which features 2 maps of England, shows figure A, the geographic density of landfill sites for special, and in figure B, non-special or unknown waste types. So these are landfill sites, basically. And this image was one part of a study titled Geographic Density of Landfill Sites and Risk of Congenital Anomalies in England. Similar work has been conducted in the United States, where nearly 1 of every 6 Americans lives within 3 miles of a major hazardous waste site. So this underscores the critical nature of carefully managing data to drive impact. In it, it enabled a strong visual that can help to raise awareness of a public health and safety issue. And cleaning up hazardous waste and reducing or eliminating its continued production in both England and the United States requires a coordinated effort between the public and the private sectors. And reliable data tells a story that is critical to securing the funds and influence necessary to conduct those efforts. Reliable data tells the how, what, when and where, of what steps to take to prevent the air we breathe and the water we drink from becoming contaminated. So just like we need to develop better habits in terms of putting clean waste into our landfills to produce better outcomes, we also need to put clean data in our systems in order to produce better outcomes. We put dangerous objects in our landfills and waste processing centers, and it runs the risk of causing harm. And if we put poor quality data into our information systems, we run the risk of causing harm, or at the least diminishing positive returns. Now, this is something work around the Washington, D.C. area. And question, how would you describe what you're seeing here? What does it look like to you? Well, this is an aerial photo of the Washington Navy Yard, which is the oldest shore establishment of the U.S. Navy. And the photo you see here was taken in '85. And superficially, it appears to be a nice-looking urban landscape. And relating this to the previous image, in 1980, Congress created the Superfund to pay for the cleanup of the country's most hazardous waste sites. And in 1998, the EPA put the Washington Navy Yard on the national priorities list, which means that it was one of the 1,700 prioritized cleanup projects of the 47,000 waste sites in the nation. And today, this site has the status of active, meaning that cleanup facilities have not yet even been completed. So just looking at the superficial data here in this image, in the visual, you would likely think that there's nothing amiss here. But in fact, the Anacostia River on which the Navy Yard is situated is part of a complex ecosystem about which much data has been collected, but about which there is still much to be learned. In data quality, we talk a lot about the real-world object. Data exists to describe a real-world object. The better the quality of your data, the better you are able to understand that object and hence your relationship to it and how your actions impact it. And just as the river flows continuously, sometimes the real-world object is in a state of constant flux. Good data has been and continues to be part of the Anacostia watershed cleanup process, which has seen participation from numerous organizations. And gathering and integrating high-quality data from various sources is critical to the work of those organizations and to other organizations, both large and small, that participate in conservation efforts worldwide. So whether you are trying to clean up landfills in England, removing contaminants from the Washington Navy Yard, running medical field trials in Africa, training small businesses in Afghanistan, empowering women and girls in Eastern Europe, or even combating domestic violence in the United States, which, as you know, has been a hot issue lately. The information you gather about the people you serve and their local environment has a good deal to do with the impact of your efforts. With so much data lacking that we wish we could get, the quality of the data that we do have to describe those real-world objects becomes of paramount importance. Data quality directly helps to create life quality. Data quality is not just about accuracy, as we will see in the upcoming parts of the presentation. It's multidimensional. We need to place the right information in the hands of people at all levels, from the C-suite to the frontline staff to the constituents. This will help to create greater efficiency and impact. By doing this, how can we help people to do new and amazing things? And finally, the data that you have enables you to have a voice, to be heard. You want to get through to people. The stories that you tell with that data creates intellectual and emotional resonance with your key audiences. It communicates the value of your work and helps to secure the funds and influence necessary to do the work well. So all that is to say, that's the why of data quality, to be able to drive impact and be able to communicate your story. These are the dimensions that we're going to focus on today, the dimensions of data quality. And those who are familiar with data quality terminology as used by major funders such as USAID will recognize some points of familiarity. And these dimensions are completeness, validity and accuracy, which are actually distinct but well paired together, consistency, timeliness, and integrity. And we're going to talk about each of these in turn. So completeness. When data is complete, it has all of the necessary or appropriate parts. And we use the terms breadth and depth to describe these qualities of completeness. And when we say breadth, we are asking, does the data have all of the expected attributes? And when we say depth, we are asking, is the data set as fully populated as expected? So to provide a simple example, when you're gathering constituent information, you don't have the complete addresses if you are not capturing the state in which each constituent lives. So the fact that you have a field or column of data to capture the state speaks to the completeness of breadth within the data set. And the fact that you have a value in that column for each of the constituents is indicative of the depth. So let's take this to a real-world example. Let's say that your org is running an economic development program in Afghanistan focused on training small business owners and entrepreneurs. And as an aspect of the data collection, the program managers and chiefs of party are tasked with collecting information on women served through these programs, an imperative coming from both the funder and from your own organization. So the program is executed through multiple technical assistance projects run out of various locations within Afghanistan, and the data collection is being done on paper and then entered into spreadsheets. So in this scenario, the data collection method was not standardized, and some projects had a field to capture the beneficiary gender and some didn't. So some of the projects had a gender field but did not consistently manage the paper documents that captured that information, resulting in a loss of information and contributing to data gaps. And the problems within that scenario that I've just described impact both the breadth and the depth of the information. So the data wasn't complete, and in order to successfully provide reports based on that data, the program managers had to make best guesses. So this impacted the data quality and the trustworthiness of that data. And this is the kind of completeness problem that you want to avoid. You want to make sure that the gender field is available as an attribute of the object you want to describe, and you want to make sure that the field has information in it. It's a simple example of problems that can be created by incomplete data. And when a major funder like USAID loses confidence in the data quality and trustworthiness of the data because they see problems either in the way that the statistics are presented or in the backup, they lose confidence in your ability to deliver on the program. And on the flip side, having good quality data and backup causes the funder to gain confidence in the program and increases the chances that the program will be expanded or renewed. So completeness is actually a simple principle, but it is very important, and it's amazing how many organizations struggle with this. And before I move on to the next dimension of data quality, check and see if there's any questions that are in play with regards to this issue.
Yeah.
Hey, Peter, this is Kyle. I'll ask a quick question. How do you balance, when you talk about completeness of data, how do you think about balancing collecting a complete set of data against what I would say might be a competing priority? Might it be the speed with which or the ease with which that data can be collected, especially if, using your example, if you were in a remote. Can you talk a little bit about how that plays into sort of answering the question about what is complete data?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's one that organizations, often debate. One of the things that I say to organizations all the time is is it better to have a small quantity of high quality data or a large quantity of low quality data? And it's one of those questions that doesn't have an easy answer. And as we'll see later in the solutions, the approach that I take is to ask what data quality is necessary to satisfy obligations within the relationships first. So the relationship to the funder, your obligations to them, your obligations in regards to the beneficiary, your obligations to yourself. So you have all these different obligations that drive what data you're going to collect. And that's really your core data. And after that, you have certain things that you might want to collect. And then there's just, you have to weigh the opportunity cost against collecting data that's not necessary to satisfy obligations within those relationships at the time. And that's really the perspective from which you need to approach this, and I'll say a little bit more about that later.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Great. So let's talk a little bit about validity and accuracy. In the world of data management, including performance data management, validity is the conformity to a domain of values. And I know that's a little technical, but I'll explain. The domain of values might be an actual set of valid values, a range of values, or a rule that would generate a value. And another way of saying this is validity is judged by comparing data to criterion or constraints. So an example might be validating a zip code based on 5 digits or 5 numeric values in a string. So your test for the validity of that data is, does it have 5 numeric values in a string in sequence 1 through 9 or 1 through 9 or whatever, and so forth. And so in order to test and measure validity, you need to know the values or rules to which the data should be compared. And those are rules that prevent invalid data from being entered, and that actually goes a long way to helping avoid inaccuracy as well. So if you're validating states by having somebody select from a drop-down list, the odds that they're going to enter an invalid state is pretty slim. So you can also extend the definition of validity to create rules for preventing or assessing duplicate data, which in data sets over a very small size is difficult to assess visually. So for example, you can create a validation rule for a beneficiary database or donor database indicating that it should be impossible to have 2 records with the same last name and street address. You could be using a piece of valid data that is nonetheless inaccurate. In order to examine accuracy, you have to examine the real-world object and compare it to the data. So for example, if I was filling in a state field, as I mentioned a second ago, and entered MD for Maryland, which is a valid response, but I lived in Virginia, that would be valid but not accurate. So to recap that, the MD is valid because it's part of a range of valid options for the data, but it would be inaccurate because it did not conform to myself, the real-world object. So let me give a little bit more of an example of how data validity and accuracy is important. So in this scenario, last week, this man that you see here was a $10,000 per year giver to your organization. And this week, he's no longer your donor. So why is that? So this man's wife was on your mailing list, and some of the donations he made were in her name and some were in his. Then his wife died, and the man let you know that his wife was deceased, and a development person at your organization accessed the woman's record and selected the wife's status as an active deceased from a drop-down list. The drop-down list ensured that the person could only select from a range of values. Therefore, it was impossible for the entry to be an invalid entry. And in the donor database, that information also accurately reflected the real-world situation. So far, so good. However, because of poor data management between the donor database and the mailing list, which was stored in a separate data repository, the wife was never taken off the list. In that separate data set, she continued to have a status of active. Therefore, even though the husband notified the organization several times that his wife was deceased, the organization continued to send mailings to her name. The person doing that data entry into the donor database reported the problem to a manager, but it was not red flagged as a potential data quality issue. As it turned out, the problem took only $1,000 to resolve, but by the time the organization recognized and reacted to the data quality problem resulting in inaccuracy in one part of the data set, the man was emotionally upset and had lost confidence in the competency of the organization. So he canceled his pledge and began giving the same amount to another org. So for lack of a $1,000 data quality decision being made proactively, the organization lost $200,000 in potential revenue, or what it expected to get from this donor during his lifetime. So particularly when it comes to donor record management and funder record management in situations like this, you have small data issues that creep in, and you don't necessarily think consciously about how those problems might result in revenue loss. But this is a real life example based on incidents that I've experienced before that indicate how just a small data sync problem like that can cost a lot of money. So there was a huge cost relative to the revenue loss relative to the cost of maintaining clean data. And I'll pause here if there are any questions from Kyle or Johan before moving on.
I love asking questions, so I'm going to jump in before Johan has a chance. You know, I don't even know if it's as much of a question, but that example was incredibly powerful because I think that there's probably a lot of people on today's call that example has precisely happened to them. And what I don't think people do, and I think that this is interesting about what you said, is I don't think people have the ability to quantify the impact of not having those types of discussions. And as I talk, I realize maybe this is more of a comment rather than a question, but it was just a really powerful example. And being candid that there was a cost about having that discussion and being able to articulate how those two systems interacted in a way to prevent that situation, which is embarrassing for the organization and frustrating. You could probably use any number of adjectives to describe how the donor would feel in this, but I just really liked that example and really liked that you actually brought data into it and talked about how it would have a financial impact on the organization.
Yeah, and I think that's helpful for a lot of people who are on this call. As you said, in some of the questions that we got leading up to this webinar reflect that. So people want to know, how do you make the business case for better data quality or better organizational initiative around data quality? And this is anecdotal, but it does give you some sense of the kind of arguments that you can make that are cost versus revenue based that help to build that case for having better data quality and better financial investments in data quality. So let's talk a little bit about consistency. This is a biggie. Data consistency is ensured by the methodology applied for data collection remaining consistent over time, and it's measured by the degree of similarity or absence of variety within the data. And data in this case includes not just the data about the real world objects itself, but the data that's collected about the data collection methodology. So let me explain. Consistency is what allows for the authentic analysis or interpretation of data over time and across space. And in order to ensure this is possible, the data collection process must be well documented and standardized to the fullest extent possible. So for example, considering every program within a vacuum can be deadly from the standpoint of collecting organizational performance measures that aggregated provide performance data to both the organization and its key funders. So let's just dive quickly into the case story here because it's a little bit hard to think about without the case story. And in this case, we're going to talk about youth services. So consistently is frequently a problem when business definitions change over time, but that fact is not recorded as a separate data point that can be applied to help interpret the data trends. So if your data collection methodology changes over time, that is a big problem in consistency, as well as just failures to control the data quality in terms of inaccuracy or completeness. So if the business definition changes, but the fact is not recorded as a separate data point that can be applied to help interpret data trends, you run into trouble. So for example, an organization's definition of at-risk youth might change over the course of a prolonged period of time, and the data collected relative to that definition. So this means that there was a lack of consistency within the data collection and hence within the data itself. The fact of the definition changing is in and of itself a critical piece of data necessary to interpret the lack of consistency within the data and make adjustments when doing analysis. Otherwise, it might seem as if the real-world object, in this case the number of at-risk youth, had changed, but in actual fact, what changed is how the organization defined at-risk. So let me just back up for a second here and reiterate the key point. So consistency is the degree of similarity or the absence of variety in the way that the data is collected over a period of time. And if there is inconsistency because of a change in methodology, including business definition, that needs to be noted and preserved with the data itself. So let's just say that at-risk could include certain environmental conditions. You know, the definition of youth might also change. It might have already started originally as being 14 to 18-year-olds. It could have changed from 13 to 18 to admit a larger group of individuals. So this is what bites a lot of organizations. They do data collection, but 5 years down the line, their definitions have changed, but nobody recorded the progression and the change of those definitions. So it looked like the organization had increased the number of constituents served, per se, but that's not real data because the change of definition wasn't noted. So I hope that makes sense. Are there any questions coming in relative to this?
Kyle, do you have any questions?
This is Kyle. I don't see. Yeah, just quickly, Peter. In terms of answering the consistency question, how do organizations think about that? Is that something that they're proceduralizing and saying routinely we look at I mean, I guess you could say any of the things we're talking about today, but this came up for me during this slide. How do you manage this from a governance perspective or from the perspective of wanting to ensure that the data is consistent? Do you have any thoughts on like what the process might be for an organization?
You know, it varies from organization to organization. I would say it starts with leadership. There has to be a point of emphasis around applying a consistent data collection methodology, and that has to come from the highest level. I think that's where it starts. The other part is just making sure that the processes are well documented and well trained on, and that people who step into the role of data collection monitoring or the M&E role or what have you over the time with the organization, make sure that they understand it's part of their job description to document not just the data collection methodology, but also preserve the changes that have the timeline of the changes that have taken place in that methodology as the organization has matured. So it's not dissimilar from an organization that either does or does not have its organizational policies well documented, and not just the policy, the current version of the policy, but the the date, preserving the record of the date at which certain policies changed and the policies that were in force at various dates. So they're actually kind of part and parcel of the same thing in a sense, and sometimes organizations develop the operational maturity for organizational policy management of the type that I just mentioned at the same time as they really start getting good at data quality. So those are two initiatives that I often see go hand in hand.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because as soon as you answered that it needs to start at the top, a big light bulb went off for me, because I think often in the work that we do, we're talking about using a system and getting people, especially with CRM, people using a system more and integrating it more actually into the way that they work. And the only way that you can do that is there's sort of a mandate from the top around that. So I think that's a really good perspective.
Any other questions, Johan, from the audience, or shall we just keep moving and get to them later?
Yeah, go ahead and keep going, and we can come back to them.
Okay, great.
Yep.
So just two more to go, and they're relatively simple. Timeliness refers to both the regularity of data collection and the availability of that data to decision makers, which are two distinct but related things. And the overall goal is to decrease the time between when the real-world object changes and when the change is known by all relevant parties, which might include program staff, organizational strategists, funders, influencers, other information consumers that you might have. So here are a couple of important points to consider in regards to timeliness. So if data has a high degree of volatility, there is an increased risk that the data will not meet standards for timeliness. So volatility is the degree to which data is likely to change over time. An example of low volatility data is gender, and an example of high volatility data is salary. And data that has high volatility will need to be checked more frequently to ensure it remains timely. So if you have a program and you are only collecting data on a quarterly basis, that is an eminently practical way to collect data. It keeps it on a regular schedule. It corresponds to oftentimes standard reporting intervals. But if you really want to make sure that that data is accurate, you need to consider the volatility of the different attributes of the object to make sure that the information about that object remains timely in regards to those high points of volatility. And data also fails to be timely if there's a lag between when a fact becomes known and when it becomes available for use. So an example of that is if a program staffer in the field becomes aware of a change to a real-world object that is important to program outcomes, but then fails to communicate it to program decision makers in a timely manner, perhaps because the change occurred between those regular reporting intervals, this highlights the need for all staff to follow both the letter and the spirit of the law when it comes to collecting and transmitting data. So data fails to be timely when there is this lag between when the data is updated at the source and when it becomes available to the decision maker at the other end of the information chain. So for example, if the data is contained in a spreadsheet at the program office but does not get transmitted to HQ, that's a timeliness problem. So a lot of organizations struggle with this, particularly with program offices and low resource environments, low connectivity, et cetera. It can be hard to transmit data. So managing the complexities of dealing with those issues and with the timeliness of data becomes exacerbated in those situations at times. But the case story that I'm going to talk about today in regards to timeliness is pretty vivid in most of our minds, probably. This picture is a devastation is a picture of the devastation that occurred on the coastline during Hurricane Sandy. And timeliness is of critical importance, particularly when it comes to disaster response, humanitarian aid, so forth. The timeliness of data, of accurate data, such as weather forecasting and resource availability and positioning, helps governments and relief orgs to successfully deliver services to assist those in urgent need. because of a natural disaster. Or in another example, some sort of mass human rights violation or civil strife. We think of the Middle East, we think of Africa, we think of other places where these kinds of things are going on. So in the events leading up to, during, and following a large-scale event like Hurricane Sandy, the timeliness of the data can make a huge difference to providing timely relief. And you'll find in these particular kinds of situations that the efficiency with which the organizations involved exchange information, the timeliness of that data being able to be combined and interpreted for different actions, has a lot to do with how organizations and agencies fare, both in the effectiveness of their activities and also in the eyes of public perception in the assessment that takes place following the aftermath of an incident such as this. So this just underscores the importance of timeliness. It's something that is never going to be fully accomplished. You know, people are always talking about having data in real time or having a 360-degree view of the data, to go back to the completeness perspective. You're never going to have data in real time, or very rarely, and you're very rarely going to have just as you're very rarely going to have fully complete data. So timeliness is something that needs to be judged in a manner similarly. You know, what is the relationships that you have that are impacted? What data do you have to provide when? That's how you start the conversation about timeliness. Any questions about timeliness before we move on?
Yeah, we have one question. So do you have any advice on, who should help define for an organization kind of what is timely? Like what might be a good role or person in the organization that could help define that?
What kind of a role would help to define timeliness?
Or
That's
who
a
in
good
the organization
question.
could help define that for the organization?
Yeah, I'll just give an example. So one of the things that you would want to do for one of my clients is you would want to go straight to talk to the program staff. And this is an organization that has an international NGO with offices in Afghanistan, until recently in Tunisia, Morocco, various places. And if I really wanted to find out what data needed to be gotten when, I would go talk to the program managers and the program associates. I would interview the chiefs of party in the field and their associates. I would really start to document how the information needed to move through the information pipeline to try to figure out what the criticality of timeliness of particular kinds of data was. It really starts with field discovery like that, if you want to get a really good sense for it, because you really get an idea of the bottlenecks that start to be created. And you also have timeliness at smaller scale, issues at smaller scale that just take place in regards to process of bottlenecks, that might hold up billing because timesheets haven't been approved. That's a timeliness issue. So it really is something that that needs to be done at a highly an analysis that's done at a highly functional level.
Okay, great. And one other question, if you could maybe speak to the logistical challenges of aligning timeliness and consistency. One of the listeners felt like there could be challenges in doing that, especially during disaster relief.
Yeah, so I would say that the less ideal the environment, or the extreme uniqueness of a particular situation, in general, the more risk you run of having in poor data quality. So, there's scenarios for which you can practice, and there's scenarios for which you can't. And you really just try to do the best that circumstances allow under all cases. So I think that it's definitely difficult to assess consistency when you're trying to deliver information extremely rapidly. I think there still has to be a certain discipline that you have to forcibly insert into those situations. Is there a value to having data faster if you can't rely on the data? So one of the things that you have to assess under those situations is what's your margin for error. You sort of have to factor in the lack of consistency as jeopardizing your or the lack of completeness even as jeopardizing your chances of having what might be referred to in some cases as a representative data sample. And therefore the accuracy of your ability to do predictive analysis decreases proportionately. So part of it's just being an awareness. Under these circumstances, we are likely to have these percentages of problems in regards to the different aspects of data quality. And we just know that that factors into our risk when making decisions.
Mm-hmm. Great. And another listener added a nice point that timeliness can extend to all kinds of situations. And in fact, the example you used earlier of the deceased donor, that could be considered a timeliness issue where the gift officer found out but didn't notify operations in a timely manner, which led
Right.
to the issue there.
Yeah, and that is a great point. I mean, by no means are these different dimensions of data quality mutually exclusive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So where you find one, you'll often find another.
Yeah.
It's just often different ways of just revolving the issue to look at it through different lenses.
Mm-hmm.
That's a great point. So let's talk a little bit about integrity, and then we'll do a brief summing up and answer any more questions that there have. So data integrity it might be a little bit different than it sounds. It's how all of the parts fit together, so how the pieces make one whole thing. If you have a large database or a data warehouse or even a file share with multiple Excel files, as is sometimes more typically the case, containing records from a range of systems, people who are using that data have an expectation that they will be able to connect it, that they expect the data to be integrated or at least integratable. And a lot of frustration comes in when it's not. The integrity of the data is one of the first things that people will question when they can't use the data in the ways that they expect. So it's important to have a plan for how you're joining data from different data sets or tables, especially that are governed by different systems, and how well the joined data fits together, or if you're not able to integrate the data at the time, planning for how it might be integrated in the future if you have more funding. So let's just take an information systems overhaul, for example. You're going to overhaul all the information systems for your organization. You might not be able to arrive at the level of system or data integration that you want initially, but you want to plan for being able to do that over time when more budget develops to be able to make incremental gains in that area and maybe create greater process efficiencies. So, but in general, data needs to be able to be integrated to make sure that it is relatable for the purpose of gaining insight and making decisions. And at a very high level, measures of integrity are measures between different tables in the databases, how you join data from different data sets or tables, and how well it fits together. It's basically your ability to relate the data cohesively. So this is just a very brief story about integrity in healthcare. Integrity matters in the healthcare industry when you need to be able to bring together data related to diseases from a wide variety of sources. So viewing all of the medical records from a particular hospital is relatively easy by comparison to collecting and analyzing disease-related data from a variety of different hospital systems. And without being able to easily integrate the various data sets, it's very time-consuming to be able to analyze the data, perhaps even to perform predictive analysis that will help to control the spread of a particular disease. So in this case, as in many cases, including the last one around disaster relief, where there's a high degree of criticality associated with making a quick response, integrity is extremely important. The ease with which you can fit the different parts of the data together. And you'll notice that there has been a lot of work done to standardize the collection of healthcare data within the US and overseas, particularly over the past 10 to 15 years. It's a continuing challenge and a battle, but one of the reasons why that work is being done is to ensure that there's integrity across multiple different systems, multiple different means of collecting health data. And that eases the ways in which people can use that data to increase public health and mitigate risk. Any questions about integrity or integratability is another way of saying it?
This is Kyle. I just want to know, was this picture taken when they saw my last bill and generated my last bill at the doctor? Because this has not been my experience of healthcare to date.
Well, they're looking at a report that they were able to generate because of their high-quality data. That's
okay, got it.
This is the kind
that
of.
was really my only question.
You mean we were able to push a button and get that?
Got it.
That is a great picture.
And let it go out on a high note. So, completeness, validity, and accuracy. This is just another rundown of the issues that we talked about today. Completeness is the breadth and depth of the data as we consider through the lens of gender equality. Validity and accuracy as considered through the lens of donor retention. You remember that poignant story. Consistency as considered through the lens of youth services and the definition of at risk. Timeliness is considered through the lens of disaster response, thinking about Hurricane Sandy. And then integrity as considered through the lens of healthcare and disease prevention. And I'm going to talk a little bit about solutions. And for those of you who submitted questions prior, this is to speak specifically to some of the questions that were asked and probably some that we've gotten in the duration of the webinar as well. And this is also to recap some of the things that I said earlier. So if you're asking how data quality challenges can be addressed, the approach that I prefer is rooted in two principles. One is that there's no such thing as perfect data quality. For data to be perfect, it would always have to be precisely representative of the real world object. And we know that's extremely difficult, if not impossible, for the objects that we describe in the context of performing our work. It's just not going to happen. But there's a point that balances that, which is data is meaningless without the context of a relationship. So your relationship to that thing, that real world object that I've been referring to, which could be a person, could be an animal, could be a place, could be a mineral, whatever. And the relative importance of that relationship compared to other relationships that your organization has, that dictates your data quality priorities. So this is what drives you to ask the critical questions. How complete does my data need to be? How accurate does it need to be, etc. The relationships that you have, the data that you need to maintain those relationships. So the specific approach to data quality for each organization, first, it relies on the clarity and strength of the organizational strategy at a high level, and as it's extended through your programs and projects. So this strategy should tell you the relationships most critical to success and the value placed on each relationship. And then you can prioritize your resources according to that value. So a lot of organizations that I get into are somewhat murky about who their audiences are and what relationships they have and the relative value of those relationships. So this is really an organizational strategy concerns. And then once you've prioritized your resources, here's what you do with them. The first thing that you do is describe the content and flow of the data within those relationships from the perspective of the dimensions of data quality that we covered today. So this is effectively represented as a business process mapping or design exercise. It's done absent the context of managing that data within a particular database or a particular information system. So this is just what your organization does or needs to do within the context of those relationships for data, and just mapping all of that down. How complete does it have to be? What are the fields? How well populated do they have to be? What's the level of accuracy that we need? What's the risk in not having that accuracy, etc. And then the second, and this is a particularly core part of community IT and Build's work, is to select or design and then implement information systems that come as close to reflecting those business processes as the budget will allow. And these might be extremely low-tech, low-integration information systems such as pen or paper, or high-tech, high-integration performance systems like Salesforce. And then the third step is to train staff extremely well on the business processes necessary to ensure proper data quality, including actions that take place both inside and outside of the information systems. So organizations of any size and complexity that do all three of these things well typically have good data quality relative to their need. And while in organizations that don't do those three things well generally have poor data quality. So just to recap quickly, describe the content and flow of data within those relationships, consider them within the context of data quality, map it out, use that to develop business requirements that help you to select the right information systems, even if they're low tech, and then train staff extremely well. Make sure you make time for that. It'll solve a multitude of ills. And those are all of the points that I have for solutions, and I'm happy to answer questions for as short or as long as they last.
All right, wonderful. Thank you so much, Peter. That was a really good deep dive into data quality and a great set of reflections on prioritizing data quality and the importance of paying attention to that. There was one comment that I wanted to pass along, and then I think we'll be at time. And that was just related to integrity. And the audience member noted that she'd also seen integrity defined in the security context, and I think specifically she was probably referring to the CIA framework of confidentiality, integrity, and availability, and that it takes on a slightly different, context or a slightly different meaning in that context. But I'm sure there's close connection between data quality and IT security on many levels.
It's also something that takes on a different meaning in USAID's dimension of data quality. They speak of integrity in a different way, more related to ethics. The definition of terms changes from venue to venue, but the ones that I chose today are more specific in regards to best practices for data quality.
Mm-hmm. Great. Well, thank you so much, Peter and Kyle. Really appreciated the presentation today. And as I mentioned earlier, the slides and the recording are going to be available on our website probably tomorrow. We'll get those up certainly by next week. And before we go, I just wanted to announce next month's webinar, which is going to be, as always, on the third Thursday of the month. It's going to be April 16th. At 4 o'clock Eastern Time, and we're going to be talking about IT policy and specifically crafting IT policy as a way of improving security, and specifically looking a little bit more at BYOD and bring your own device policy. So we hope you'll all join us next month for our webinar series, and we appreciate your time today. Everyone have a wonderful day. Take care.